Hello 522 participants. Today we'll be using an eco-mapping process to help families gather information on their strengths and their resources and their supports. Where are the places in their daily routines and activities and within their families and communities that they lean for support? So the first thing that we want to do when you're interviewing a family about their strengths and their resources and their supports is to explain why you're doing the eco-map. And here's some text that you can use, or you can create your own. So we let families know that the purpose of the meeting is to get to know more about your family so I can understand what resources and supports you have as we begin our work together. I'd like to find out about your supports by drawing an eco-map, which is a different kind of family portrait. Together we'll draw circles for your friends, your family, things you like to do, your job, your healthcare providers, and so on, and connect these back to the circle for your family using different kinds of lines, depending on how much support, resource, or even stress each of these are. Most families really enjoy drawing an eco-map or having you draw one with them. Oftentimes we don't think about our network of supports as one big system, but when we think back to Bronfenbrenner and what we learned about the ecological systems theory and Bronfenbrenner's work, we know that it is important to have an understanding of what resources and strengths and supports families already have, so that as we design services and supports with that family, that we're able to maximize this resources and supports that they already have. So what we do is we start with a family and just say, who lives with you? Who lives in your house? And so I'm going to go through an example of how the eco-map would look for my family. And so we would list Chris, my husband, me, Spencer, and Maisie. And what you'll want to do is you're interviewing the family, you'll want to get the ages, just of the children, maybe not of the adults, but get the ages of the children so that you have a record of that. And even though, let's say we're interviewing a family and we know that we're interviewing a family who has a child with a developmental delay or disability, it is still important to get an understanding of the resources and supports for all family members, not just relative to the developmental delay or disability. We want to have a true picture of the supports and resources for the whole family. So next we might ask, do you have any family nearby? Some families will have lots of family to list nearby, and others, like our family, we don't have any family nearby. We live a couple of states away from our nearest family, and so there are no circles to draw for my family to represent other family nearby in Lexington or even Kentucky. Next, we can ask, what about your friends? Who should we list as friends for everyone in your family? And in my family, for Chris, my husband, we would list a couple of our neighbors as his friends. For me, we would list a couple of my friends from tennis as my main friends. And then a couple of other friends who don't live in my town, but are other friends as well. Then we can ask families about all of the groups they're a part of. These can be social groups, these can be religious groups, health groups, any sort of recreational activities. And so we'll just list a couple for us. We'll list a running club that Chris is a part of, and then my friends Laura and Sarah are a part of a tennis group that I participate in, and so there's a couple that we could list. But we want to ask, for the families you're interviewing, you want to make sure you ask about all of those types of groups and make sure that you give a circle for each of those types of groups. When we're talking about children who have disabilities in particular, it's important to find out about health care for any family, but in particular for families for whom maybe health care expenses are greater. Perhaps if a child has a disability, there may be greater health care needs. And so for all families, but especially those who have children with multiple severe disabilities, we want to find out about health care. So you might ask about healthcare providers. We could have listed my doctor, Chris's doctor, Spencer and Maisie's pediatricians, and we can list how healthcare is supported. And in our family, Chris and I have medical insurance, so we could list that. If a child has any specialty providers, sees any specialists, you would list those types of healthcare providers as well. One important question, we know that for families of young children, sometimes one of the greatest stressors can be having childcare covered when you need it. And so we want to ask families, so who helps with the children if you need it? Who takes care of the children? What if you and your significant other or friends want to go have some recreational adult time? You know, who takes care of the children, who watches them? And we can get an idea if families have support there. Oftentimes when families have other family living in the same town, that's many times who is helping with their children. For families like us, I can tell you, my children are older, but when my children were young, this was a huge stressor for us because we didn't have family nearby. And when our children were young, we didn't really have well-established social groups yet. We had moved to Kentucky from another state, and we didn't have ready-made friends. We didn't have family, and so there would have been a clear gap in our ecomap there. So even though we are identifying supports and resources, the ecomap can help you as a teacher, provider, counselor also identify the gaps in supports. And so that would have been a gap 10 years ago, 15 years ago for us. So what about income? Now this is a tricky topic to broach, and you want to be sensitive about it, ask about it in a casual, informal way. And so when we're talking about income, is there a job or other source of income that we can list? How do you, what are your sources of income that help you meet your family's needs? It's a good way to ask that. And so we would list Chris's job, my job, and a house that we used to live in that we kept and that we now rent. So those are our sources of income. Some families may use this opportunity to share that this is a bit of a source of stress for them. And we'll talk later about asking about stress. But again, we don't want to prod too much about income, but just ask casually and see what families offer. What about extended family? Do you have a family maybe that doesn't live in your town, but your extended family that you are connected with? And so for my ecomap, I no longer have family, and so that would probably be the place in our interview that I would tell you that my parents both passed away and I don't have siblings, so I don't have extended family. One piece, I guess, of this ecomap that's not here that I probably would add if we were having a conversation is that I do have an aunt who I was very, very close to, and now she has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I'm helping to arrange her care. So we would probably list her. But on this ecomap, we've listed my husband's family, his parents, and his siblings as our extended family. Next, we want to ask about activities, groups, activities, routines that the children in the house are involved in. And so for my children right now, we would add Maisie's cross-country team and Spencer's CrossFit activities. He's involved every afternoon after school with a group in sort of this boot camp kind of weight training activity that he does with a group. And Maisie is on the cross-country team. We could have added the track team, and those are their main activities that they're involved in. So it can be athletic activities, another social group. There's also a dance group that Maisie's involved in, a cotillion group that she does every now and then. We could have added that to our ecomap as well. And where do they go to school? So we want to ask about where, and you may know this, if you're interviewing a family of a child at your school, you already know the answer to this. So for my children, Spencer goes to Henry Clay High School in Lexington, a large public high school. It's actually the largest public school in Kentucky with about 3,000 students. And then Maisie has a different experience. She goes to a small private school in town. A whole, if you were interviewing me privately, I would give you the whole background on why we made those decisions and all, which would be interesting for you to learn and probably helpful for you to learn if you were supporting our family in some way. So you can see, even though we're moving through each of these questions fairly quickly, there's an opportunity for you to ask a lot of follow-up questions to really get to know a family. In addition to recording a family's priorities and our family's resources and strengths and supports, you're also having a chance to really establish a relationship with the family and get to know them. And it's okay if you share little bits of information along the way. It's not that you want to interject a lot. And people who are trained, oftentimes people who are trained from a social work perspective are taught never share anything about yourself. And I understand that perspective and appreciate it, but I can tell you, as a person who's worked with many families, for me, it works better for me to connect with families when I'm willing to share a little bit. Not derail the conversation, not share too much to take the focus off of the family, but enough to say, hey, I'm willing to share too, or I can relate to you in this way, to build those relationships. And it's more than just rapport of how on the surface you're interacting, but truly building a relationship. So next we're going to ask families, okay, now let's take a look at your whole ecomap and let's think about the relative strength that each of these resources provides to you. How strong are these relationships? And we can do this, first we want to ask, is there anything else that we should add? Any other bubbles, because you're going to ask a series of questions, but you might forget something. And so if you want to give families a chance to add. And like I just said, even though I drew this ecomap in preparation for this video, there were already several things I thought that I could add that, given a good interview, that I might have added in those spaces. So as we think about the relative strength of relationships, we can thicken the lines. So you might take a marker, or you might draw several lines. You'll see in an example I'll show you in a minute that I just drew more lines if you're using a pencil or pen that's not as easy to make thick. Or you could use a highlighter to make the lines thick. Any way that you want to visually depict the stronger relationships is fine. So you can see that there are a number of lines that we strengthened, that we made thicker, because they provide critical support, more frequent support to our family. And then we ask, are there any relationships strained? And there aren't really. I just made this up, and I knew Chris's siblings could take this. But if there are any relationships that are strained, you can do what I did here by drawing a dotted line. So we drew a dotted line to Chris's siblings to show if there were any sort of difficulty with the relationship. Perhaps you're working with a family that is a blended family, and perhaps there are previous spouses or parents of children that are no longer within this center circle, this center household, and perhaps those relationships provide both support, but perhaps there are some strains. This is not the case for us, but sometimes people speak of difficulty getting along with in-laws. They find them to be a lot of support, but it's also very stressful or irritating in some ways. And so you can add a dotted line for strained relationships. And again, this is one way to depict it. You can choose any way you like to depict strain, stress, and relative strength of relationships. So stressors, and I chose to indicate those with red dotted lines. A lot of people will say their jobs provide some stress. So even though I've got a thick line to both mine and Chris's job because they are necessary, they are critical, they're the biggest supports we have, we also find stress with those. And as you might imagine, with having a rental house, that sometimes that can provide stress as well in terms of maintenance and navigating issues with renters. Next, we can think, and you don't have to do this with the family. This is something I want you to do. You could do it with the family, or just you can reflect after you listen to the family, is to code the type of support that each of the resources provide. And the E's stand for emotional support. And so we can see I have lots of E's there that provide emotional support to our family. M's are the material support, so anything that is providing income or support for material needs, like our insurance provides material support in covering our health care, that's a material support. And then informational support, so I've added I's to the children's schools, but also you may get informational support. Let's say a child is receiving services from a therapist, from an interventionist, and that therapist or interventionist is providing information that the family can use to support their child's development. And so my children's school does provide information that we use to help support our children's academic growth. In your book chapter that you're reading, you'll see that there's an example ecomap. So this one looks a little bit different. It doesn't have all of the colors. We've used jagged lines to represent stressed relationships. We have dotted lines to represent strained relationships. We also have arrows, and I would like for you to use these arrows as well on your ecomap. The arrows indicate the direction of support. So remember earlier I mentioned that I have an aunt who is receiving long-term care, and so when I was younger I would have the arrows from my aunt flowing to me because she provided a lot of support to me in terms of emotional support, material support at times, but now the direction of that support has changed. We all know that ecomaps, our map of how our family looks and the type of support and resources that we have changes. It's fluid over time. And so now the direction of that support would be moving from our family to my aunt. So the eco-mapping process is a pretty enjoyable activity. It's as long as you have planned ahead the types of questions that you want to ask, and it can be helpful. I'm comfortable completing an eco-map without notes, but you probably want to have some notes that guide your questions. And not that you want to read stiffly straight from a protocol, but just to jog your memory of the types of questions you want to ask as you create the eco-map with the family that you choose to interview. I hope you enjoy the activity, and I look forward to seeing your eco-maps.